Hello and welcome to düzdanışaq Straight Talk, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. I'm Ismail Jalilov. This will be our first broadcast from a new studio to which we moved, and this also explains our silence for a couple of weeks. I would like to use this opportunity to express the condolences of everyone who's working on this channel to the family of Orhan Askarov, the slain guard at the Tehran embassy. We wanted to do a broadcast on this topic, but we could not due to technical problems and issues. I hope this small token of our appreciation of his life and what he did will be somehow relayed to his family and his close ones. As always, we are interested in what's going on in our region. From time to time, we delve into politics in wider Eurasia and even Europe. But today we're discussing our home geography, the South Caucasus. I have Onnik Krikorian, Onnik J Krikorian, a journalist and photojournalist who is joining us live from Tbilisi. We're expecting your questions, and I will read the audience's questions to our guest as well. Onnik, good evening, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me, and also I'd like to apologize for taking so long to actually accept. You tried before, but finally I'm here.
You know, they say better late than never, and I appreciate you accepting our invitation. May I ask you, if possible, I didn't mean to start to lead with this, but may I ask you, what was the hesitation? Was there a hesitation to accept an invitation because I'm an Azerbaijani journalist, because I'm a journalist in general? Could we talk about the reasons for your hesitation, please?
Nothing to do with you being Azerbaijani or an Azerbaijani journalist. I still meet with Azerbaijanis, analysts, journalists, whatever, and have done since the war, and during the war I was also in touch with them. It was more to do with the toxic nature of the online environment. And also there are certain times where you just suddenly feel as though there's nothing worth talking about, or rather, I should say, that's a bit flippant, things are uncertain. So it would be a lot of speculation without really knowing what's going on. But yeah, so it's a combination of factors. And also, by the way, as a journalist, I'm not used to being in front of the camera. I'm used to being behind the camera. So that's also something that's a bit weird for me.
I can relate to that, because every time they ask me for an interview, I'm like, why would you want to talk to me? I don't know anything. I'm learning things from the people that come on my show. So I can relate and understand. You know, Onnik, I'm very glad you talked about the intransigence, about this toxic environment online, because I have to deal with this day in and day out, unfortunately. And I will not name names, but I have a friend, a European friend, who merely retweeted my broadcast, the link to my broadcast, and said that this would explain the Azerbaijani point of view on some subjects, you know, on what's going on in Lachin. And she was called a genocide enabler, a genocide denier, you know, some horrible, horrible things that I would not want to call anyone easily. Can we please start with that? I mean, what is going on? For instance, I can show you any tweet or any reply to ANCA, you know, the Armenian National Congress. Oh, here would be a great example. I don't know if you will see it. I will narrate it and explain what it is. You know, stop anti-Armenian hate, and there's like a big crescent and a star next to Azerbaijan. There's Turkey, there's Israel, there's everything, you know. You can open any ANCA tweet and there will be allusion to the fact that Azerbaijanis are Muslim and Armenians are Christian. There will be an attempt to repackage this conflict into a religious one. First of all, do you agree? Do you think this is a religious conflict? And secondly, is that really helpful? Does that really work? I mean, for people who don't know about this conflict, what do they feel when they hear it's about, you know, Muslims killing Christians, for instance?
So I think that, no, I don't believe that it was ever a religious conflict. I personally don't even believe it's an ethnic conflict. I believe it's a political conflict, which is kind of controversial to say. I know the tweet that you are referring to because I saw that and I actually felt inclined to like that particular tweet. I think it was a quote tweet or maybe something like this. I actually thought your interview was very good, and obviously the people that objected to it probably didn't even watch the interview that you held. I think we have to remember that social media, unfortunately, has been toxic for a number of years, and we can't just say that it's the Armenian-Azerbaijani context. During the Brexit referendum and the post-Brexit situation, we also had this situation of huge aggressive polarization. During the Trump years, we had it as well, including around Black Lives Matter. And so I don't think it's specific to the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. I also had this discussion yesterday with a friend from Yerevan who was visiting. And I just think that in many cases we should just ignore it. But with regards to the religious dynamic, I think that the West, I don't know if you're still there. Oh, you just posted the screen.
Yes, I'm here.
I was a bit shocked. I think that the problem is that for a Western audience, it's very difficult to understand the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict or the Armenia-Azerbaijan dynamics. And so people like black and white, good and evil, right? And I think that, you know, when you put it like Christian versus Muslim, then it becomes something that maybe some part of a Western audience can understand. And I think this is a problem with a lot of reporting. It isn't just about tweets. It's also about articles about the conflict. You will always see Muslim Azerbaijan versus Christian Armenia, etc. I just think it's best to ignore. You're not going to change things. I think if people see examples of ethnic hate speech, they are best reported. It's best not to respond to them. It's best not to get angry at them, and so on. I don't know if I answered your question here. I think and let's be fair. I mean, it's not just Armenians who do this, right? Azerbaijanis also do this. And I'm not saying that I'm singling out Azerbaijanis or Armenians. On social media, everyone is doing this. Recently, I've had to look into the deployment of the European Union mission in Armenia. And there's one guy in Europe who's really clued up on this and has been monitoring it closely and providing good information. And I sent him a message on LinkedIn the other day, what's your Twitter handle? I want to tag you for the information. And he said, oh, I don't use Twitter anymore. It's way too toxic. And I think that's the reality of the situation.
Honestly, I had Twitter for 3 or 4 years, and I've been using it only to promote my programs, and I had about maybe 500 followers. And as soon as I started replying Anka and their tweets, the number of my followers tripled, because I believe Twitter is a place that rewards conflict, rewards intransigence, rewards this kind of stuff. It promotes it somehow. I don't know how their algorithm works, but apparently that makes you very popular when you start picking fights with somebody. Well, of course, I totally agree with you, because it's not only Armenians doing it. Let's be fair. I've seen quite a lot of tweets from Azerbaijanis that took me aback. I was like, oh my, we learned to be very, very mean in good English very, very fast. But if you ask literally any Azerbaijani that I feel, their response will be, we had to respond. Their diaspora is very strong, their information campaign is very strong, their propaganda campaign is very strong. We have to do what we can. Onnik, do you agree with that? When you look at the Armenian propaganda, can we call it that, first of all? I don't want to put words in your mouth. When you look at the depiction of the conflict, the way it is related to the Westerners, I can show you a couple of tweets by Western journalists who wrote something and then they felt they had to walk it back. Isabella Kaminsky, who wrote for The Guardian, is one of the examples. She wrote about this conflict, but then I believe she got attacked in a very orchestrated, very well-organized way. So it's a long-winded question, I'm sorry. Can we call it a propaganda, and is it really helping anyone? Who does it help other than those people who perpetuate hate?
I don't think it helps anyone. I think probably the best term is information war. This has become a reality of life. Recently, I saw 2 online meetings, one with an American Armenian journalist in Yerevan called Lara Setrakian. And I think recently I saw Alessia Vartanyan, who was giving a testimony to a Canadian Foreign Affairs Committee. And both of them said that Twitter is not going to resolve anything, right? So, they can tweet, but who is consuming it? Their own little bubble is consuming it. Policymakers are not going to be changing their policies based on it. Tovoi Klar, who's being particularly singled out, I don't think is going to change his position, trying to be a neutral mediator in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. And as for media, Laura Setrakian said something very interesting. If you start harassing journalists, don't be surprised when they give up covering your conflict. Because they don't like this, they don't want this.
Would it be a bad thing? I feel like, do people want more coverage, more honest coverage, or do people want coverage that comes from certain people, I don't want to name their names, who have, let's say, a very particular view, or they choose sides or pick sides, and, it's pretty clear what their agenda is. Will we be able to say that both Armenians and Azerbaijanis are interested in full, as much possible as coverage can be, or would that also be against people's interest?
I would hope that Armenians and Azerbaijanis would want proper objective reporting. But looking online, it's pretty clear that those who are active definitely do not. They want only that which confirms their prejudices, their subjective view of the conflict, and this relates to both sides. In some cases, they don't want to face up to the fact that maybe their side also did something incredibly bad at some point during the 30-year-old conflict. So I don't think they want it, and I think it scares them for that, because of that. I think that what we've seen in recent years, during the Trump period, right, we had this term both-sidisms emerge. And we also had other things like cancel culture emerge and so on and so forth. They probably started off with very good intent. But what has happened is that they have become weaponized. So now if you don't like something, you can just use the both-sidism argument, and it kind of shuts down all conversations, regardless of the fact that actually there may be two stories to this conflict. It's not as black and white as people make out. And I think we can see this in relation to the Lachin impasse, blockade, whatever you want to call it, at the moment. Everything is being now framed in terms of Ukraine and Russia. This is the only reason why the West wants to actually cover this. And as a result, you have this, someone referred to it to me the other day as cognitive dissonance, because there is no clear story here. On the one hand, you've got Armenia saying that we don't like Russia, we don't think Russia is doing what it should be doing, etc., etc. But then in Karabakh, we have Ruben Vardanyan, who's actually defending the Russians. And you cannot put that in one story, because then the whole Western audience is confused. And before, what was a very simple black and white story set in the context of Ukraine, Russia, i.e. non-Russians good, Russians bad, that's blown out of the water. It doesn't exist anymore. So I don't think people want proper, full, objective coverage because on the one hand, it creates a very complicated story. On the other, there are many things to criticize both sides for, if that makes sense.
Onnik, it's very interesting that you mentioned this. When it comes to coverage, objective coverage, and cognitive dissonance, you do appreciate and understand the Western perspective. People in the West, and maybe I am the only one thinking that, but people in the West tend to like stories from abroad that are very easily digestible. They're black or white. It's pretty clear who the bad guy is, or very close to it. You can understand what is going on, but when it comes to a conflict as complex as Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict, nothing is pretty clear. Nothing is clear cut. And I feel that Americans, first of all, get very confused, then they get tired of it. If they cannot figure out whom to sympathize with, they don't know why they would invest emotionally and intellectually into a conflict they don't understand. So when it comes to this, can we please talk about it from the Western perspective? Let's forget for a second that you and I are tied to the region. Let's look at it from the Western perspective. Is it okay to say that instinctively Westerners are on the Armenian side? And if so, if yes, what is it that what is the impetus, I would say, for the Westerners to side with one side or the other?
To be quite honest with you, I really don't think the West is on one side or the other in terms of the peoples. I think most Westerners don't even probably know about this conflict. We've had a few articles about what's been going on in Lachyan. We had a few articles during the 2020 war. A lot fewer in between, but I don't think we had mass coverage because it's a faraway region. It's a complicated story to tell. And also we've had other stories which the West considers bigger, for example, Ukraine, Russia. Mm-hmm. And then probably we get some more Lachyan stories, right, coming in, and then what happens? You have the attack on the Azerbaijani embassy in Iran, and then
what do you think about this? I'm sorry for interrupting. Actually, there was a question from Anar Panacha. What do you think about this attack, and what would you say about the reaction in the Armenian social media to that attack? I read some stuff in Russian. I know that Russian may be not one of the languages you speak, but what I saw turned my stomach. Could you gauge any reaction to it in Armenia?
So I have actually not been using social media for the past 2-3 days. And if you look at my Twitter stream, I'm not tweeting so much. I've had other things to do. I've also been recovering from a cold, so I haven't seen the reaction. And I really have no opinion on the attack itself until all the details are known. I did see some where some Azerbaijani accounts instantly accused Armenians of being behind it. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's right in any terrorist attack. We have the same thing in Europe, right? If there's a terrorist attack in Europe, people blame Muslims, right? And it's wrong. And sometimes you discover that actually it wasn't a Muslim that did it. So we shouldn't really be doing the same thing in this case. Until we know the details, I know it's a bit sketchy. The story, I have read that, it says, first of all, the guy went in with 2 children, then the video footage showed there were no children. But I don't have an opinion on that. I didn't see a lot of the responses. I can imagine some of the responses, and I don't think that helps. But the point is, you've got to understand that social media is designed to basically antagonize and anger people and to start a new online war. I also think we have to take things in perspective. Your average Armenian and Azerbaijani social media user, especially on Twitter, does not represent the populations of the countries. In some cases, they're actually not in the country, and in some cases, they're actually not from the country as well. So I think we should just treat social media for what it is, which is a minor toxic information war ground.
Be careful, Onnik, before the Armenian diaspora accuses you of trying to disenfranchise them, because they're not based in the country, they're not based in the region. Their children do not die in wars that, in my opinion, they help perpetuate. So, of course, I'm joking, but half joking only. My concern with the intransigence in diasporas is that their children and they themselves don't have anything to lose. They basically undermine all kinds of peace building in the region because of the things they believe. And at the same time, it's so easy to be intransigent when you live abroad, isn't it? When you live in California or, let's say, Washington, D.C., it's so easy to be nonchalant and very cavalier about the conflict. Am I right? Would you agree?
I would not agree. Mm-hmm. I agree with what you're saying, but again, I think you're seeing just a small part of the so-called diaspora, and I say so-called because the diaspora is not a homogeneous unit. I did actually watch again your interview with Gerard Liberidian, and this was touched upon earlier. And I think even you were saying that there's a difference between the American Armenian diaspora, the Russian Armenian diaspora, the French Armenian diaspora, and within those groups as well, you have different forces as well, based on political grounds and so on. I'm not going to use this to criticize Anchor. Anchor is a lobby group. I also remember your interview with Onnik J Krikorian, where he tried to explain that certain countries have a lobbying system that makes these diaspora groups stronger than they would be in other countries. And the United States and France, he gave as 2 examples. I think most diasporan Armenians and most Azerbaijanis in this newly formed, I think it's pretty much newly formed diaspora, are more concerned about their well-being in life and their families and their jobs. And I don't think most of them are engaged in community structures or lobbying groups. You also have political divisions within the Armenian diaspora as well. I do actually speak to Azerbaijani friends a lot about this, where they say, "Oh my God, the diaspora, it's changing everything. It has control over Armenia." I think actually most people would argue that it does not influence policy in Armenia. More than that, if you look at the following of Anchor, how many Armenians are there worldwide? 9 million, 10 million? Go and see how many people like their Facebook page and how many people follow them on Twitter.
But somehow they do exist. Somehow they do have sources of funding. Somehow they do not cease their operations. How would that be explained, do you think?
I don't look into diaspora and lobbying groups that much. I don't think it's from the Armenian government, that's for sure. One thing we can also say about the diaspora at the moment is the groups like Anchor are technically opposed to Nikol Pashinyan. So sure as hell that the money is not coming from the Armenian government.
Oh, I wasn't thinking about the Armenian government. I was thinking about rich people who live abroad,
Yeah, sure.
again in the diaspora.
Yeah, I mean,
I
sure.
wasn't involving the government at all.
Wealthy benefactors for sure. But again, I don't look into diasporan groups so closely. But I do think that Azerbaijanis and Turks kind of bestow more power on diaspora lobbying groups than they actually have, and especially with regards to influencing policy in Armenia. Very interesting thing happened last year, which actually angered a lot of diasporan groups, is Nikol Pashinyan. There used to be something called the Armenia Diaspora Conferences.
Mhm.
I think there were only about 6 that they had. I went to the first, which was, I can't remember, 99 maybe. And it was a way to get all the diasporan groups from all over the world together in Armenia and Yerevan and try to support the homeland. And Nikol Pashinyan held a forum last year, and not one of the main groups in the diaspora were invited. It was individuals only. And we also had an interview about that forum with Zari Sinanyan, who's the Minister of Diaspora for the Republic of Armenia. And he purposely, in the interview, said that he believes that the existing structures in the diaspora are antiquated. They have no relevance now. So again, I just think that Azerbaijanis and people in Turkey put too much emphasis on the diaspora and its ability to influence policy, to disrupt peace deals. And I think we're seeing this also with Pashinyan. I mean, there's plenty to criticize Pashinyan for. But for one thing, it seems as though he wants to take Armenia away from being tied down to reliance on the diaspora, rightly or wrongly, and also to be totally preoccupied with Karabakh as the central issue. For him, it seems the Republic of Armenia and its ability to survive and its ability to grow seems to be the main priority at the moment.
Right. I wanted to show my tweet because in what you said, I almost recognize what I did, but again, in my own defense, if you allow me for a second to clarify, this is my tweet yesterday: deadly attack on Azerbaijan embassy in Tehran. I have no special knowledge, but to put it in context, we all remember comments on Armenian TV recently asking publicly whether the strategy of terrorism against Turkish diplomats from the 1970s needed to be revived. It, of course, stops, in my opinion, and that was my intention, at the water's edge. I wasn't actually going and blaming Armenia for it, but I wanted to bring in the context of this intransigent rhetoric that I myself, with a lot of sadness actually, saw on Armenian television. You know, 2 people, I don't know their names, I can find the footage, in Russian discussing, openly questioning whether we should go back to, you know, Asala-style terrorism. How do you think that sort of rhetoric inside the Republic of Armenia affects the dynamic in the region? Because I don't want to blame Armenians for it, but I understand when Azerbaijanis are listening to this and reacting to this, and it spills over into Twitter, it spills over into even comments on my little channel. It's everywhere. What do you think could be done to address this? Because terrorism is terrorism, no matter who does it, and for what purposes. Are there a lot of people in Armenia supporting terrorism against Azerbaijan and Turkey?
Okay, so first of all, when you say Armenian television, it really depends. What was it? Was it public television of Armenia? I think no.
I don't think so. I don't think so, but I should find actually,
So
if my viewers could tweet it to me, that would be great. I want to show it as well.
was it a minor web-based television program? So the point is you do have pluralism of views, no matter how toxic they might be. I've seen a few other examples of this, and again, it was in Russian, so I think that says a lot as well. Do most Armenians support terrorism? I think no. I mean, this is a kind of similar question to during Al Qaeda and ISIS. Do most Muslims support terrorism? And again, the answer is no. So again, I think we shouldn't stereotype. I do need to see the piece. I don't think it was on Armenian public television. There is a lot of toxic media out there. And they do function. Whether or not the state should be addressing this issue about promoting terrorism, but I don't believe the majority of Armenians support terrorism. Unfortunately, yes, there are heroes which Azerbaijanis and Turks will consider to be terrorists that most Armenians look up to. But that's also part of the reality as well, and it will take some time before both countries start to looking to perhaps more amenable to peace role models and so on and so forth. I mean, both countries have had a very traumatic experience with each other. And this region naturally looks to strong men, and the idea of heroes is very strong here as well.
When we talk about heroes, I just want to understand who or what sort of people are we talking about? Because we do understand that calling somebody a hero who went and killed a whole bunch of Azerbaijanis, it does inflame passions in Azerbaijan. And of course, you can respond with Ramil Safarov, but from what I understand, he's the only case in Azerbaijan that some people consider a hero, somebody who killed an Armenian while he was asleep. I don't think this kind of an action would qualify as heroism, killing somebody who is defenseless and sleeping, but that is my personal opinion. But who do you consider heroes that Azerbaijanis would find objectionable? I'm just trying to understand that.
Well, for example, I haven't seen her for quite a while, but I do know Seta Molkonian personally. And when I speak to Azerbaijani friends and I mention Seta's name, they do get angry because they consider Monte to be a terrorist, whereas in Armenia he's considered to be a hero. And so that puts me in a very interesting and difficult spot, because Seta is one of the most interesting and intelligent people I've ever interviewed, actually. And I never found her, by the way, full of hatred. I've never met Monte. So there's one example. Another example would be, for example, Garagin Nejde. But I don't believe Garagin Nejde is a role model for most Armenians. But as you know, there's a metro station named after him. There's a statue named after him. And there is a strong belief amongst some part of the population in individuals like Garagin Nejde as well. So, you have these examples.
Okay. We alluded to Russia and Ukraine. I wanted to talk about the role of that conflict. Actually, a lot of interesting questions came from my audience, much more interesting than the ones I'm planning to ask. So I'll get to them in a minute. But let me ask you one last question of mine in this part of the interview. Russia and Ukraine, what does this conflict do to us or for us? Does it? How do people react to what's going on? Because some part of the Azerbaijani Twitter sphere and blogosphere would like to paint Armenians as Russian supporters. It works with the narrative. I want you to explain to me what you see the Armenian position as. Are Armenians on Russia's side, as some people try to claim? What does the dynamic on the Russian-Ukrainian front do to our region? In general, people are asking, let me read this other question and I'll let you answer all of them in whatever order you would like. If Russia leaves our region, can we, Azerbaijan and Armenia, make peace in Karabakh? Can Armenians stay in Karabakh with Azerbaijani passports? Anar Panakov is asking. So let's look at Russo-Ukrainian war, and let's look at Russia's role in our region. What do you think it is? What do you think Russians want? Do they want peace? Will they let us have peace?
Gosh. So first of all, I'm not really following the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I think one conflict is quite enough for me at the moment. I'm not too happy with how everything post-February 2022 in relation to Armenia and Azerbaijan is now framed in the context of Ukraine and Russia. It, of course, has had an impact on the region. I'm not in Armenia, so I can't talk about the situation there. But what I am reading, and there have been surveys, the amount of support for Russia is declining in Armenia. Apparently, a poll recently showed more and more Armenians were against the Russian involvement in Ukraine. But again, I'm not there, but this is what I was reading. But I think that's more linked to the perceived inaction of the Russian military and peacekeeping forces in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh. But then we have this weird contradiction, right? Pashinyan is very much trying to distance himself from Russia. The number of statements he's come out, which can be perceived as anti-Russian, has worried some people who are not necessarily pro-Russian, by the way. Because without Russia in Armenia, what will replace it? This is one concern. The second thing is at the moment, the Russian peacekeeping force is the only force in Nagorno-Karabakh. And people can call for an OSCE international peacekeeping force, a UN peacekeeping force, but it doesn't quite work like that. Azerbaijan has to give permission for those forces to be there. There has to be the intent and the interest in those groups in going there. It needs a UN security mandate. Russia is on the UN Security Council. It can veto such a move. The OSCE works by consensus. So the idea that you can replace the Russians seems very unlikely. And the Russians are there at present. And also, I don't believe that the OSCE or the UN would do any different than what the Russian peacekeepers are doing at the moment on the Lachin corridor. Because Russian peacekeepers or any peacekeeping forces are not meant to side with one side over the other. They generally don't use force except in self-defense. So the idea somehow that the Russians should be expected to, I don't know what, violently disperse the camp on the Lachin corridor, I don't think any peacekeeping force would do that, especially in such a volatile and sensitive environment. Do the Russians want peace? Well, generally, the argument has been no. And in fact, I think when someone recently asked me, do you think the Russians want peace? My answer was, I think they want control. And I think that peace is useful for the Russians as long as it can be used to have some kind of control over both Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I think we can look at the Lachin corridor as one example of that. And I think we can look at the Zangezur corridor as another example of that, if and when it is actually constructed. And you can see from the tripartite statement that that's exactly what has been penciled in the agreement, that Russia uses its peacekeeping forces to control the Lachin corridor, and that the Russian Border Guard Service will control any route from Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan. So I think control is what they want, more than peace. I don't think they want a new conflict in the region, especially after Ukraine. This is something we can talk about now. The Russians are overstretched. Already we believe that a certain amount of the peacekeeping force has been taken out of Nagorno-Karabakh in order to replenish the number of troops in Ukraine. So I don't think Russia is particularly interested in the conflict right now when it's already got its hands full in Ukraine.
I was listening to you and asking myself the question. I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure that I gave you ample time to answer. If you need to clear your throat, it's okay. I muted you for a second, and I wanted to ask the audience that are watching us, please do hit the like button, because it truly helps promote our channel, and do comment and do share if you can. We're interviewing Onnik J Krikorian, a journalist and photojournalist. Onnik, I have a question. I was listening to you and asking myself, I would like to redirect. Is it morally defensible, though? If I understood you right, you said more and more Armenians are against Russians now because they think that Russians have failed their role, maybe a role as an ally, Armenia's ally. They failed in 2020 war and this and that and the other. To me, when the war with Ukraine started, it was an instinctive decision. It took me a nanosecond to understand who is right and who is wrong. Maybe I'm too Western, maybe I'm too ideological, maybe I don't want to see 50 shades of gray here, but to me it was pretty clear who is the aggressor and who is the victim here. Is it morally defensible? Does it mean that people in our region look at the war of two bigger nations and they take sides based on what have you done for me lately?
Gosh. One, people's opinions are formed by the media they consume. So I think it really depends on what the coverage was in Armenia about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. You even have some dissent in Western capitals as well about who is solely to blame. Is it black and white as well? Did NATO push too far? This is one of the reasons why I don't get involved in this conflict, the Ukraine-Russia one as well, because it's, again, a very, very complicated topic. Of course, I'm totally against what Russia is doing in Ukraine. I'm totally against the destruction that's been unleashed on Ukraine. But there's no doubt it's also a proxy war, right? Now, traditionally, Armenia has been reliant on Russia for its protection. So there also comes a certain amount of reality as well. But we have seen that Pashinyan is pushing away from Russia. And a number of people have said that, and they asked this question to Vardanyan, right? On Hard Talk, Stephen Sakor asked this to Vardanyan. So this is an issue. It's like some republics are worried that after Ukraine, depending on how it goes, maybe they are next. And I would also put it like this. Do most countries form their foreign policy? Do most publics form their own opinion based on what is morally right in the world? I'm not entirely sure that they do. Activists maybe do. And again, the media shapes a lot of what is being, what people think. And I'm sure a lot of Russian language media is being consumed in Armenia still today. And I think
Do you
that
think they exert power or influence over a lot of people in Armenia? That is also what I'm trying to understand, and I'm trying to break that.
Not anymore, apparently. By the way, I listen to pretty much anything I can from people inside Armenia and talking about Armenia, including the opposition. And the opposition are very much against the removal of Russia from Armenia. And they also point to a huge surge in anti-Russian propaganda within Armenia at present, and the amount of anti-Russian narratives that are in circulation. On the other hand, you've had a huge influx of Russians into Armenia, and there's been no cases of violence, and everyone is, getting on quite fine. So I think it's a very complex question, but I don't believe that this should be framed in a, you should be morally against Russia because of what's happening in Ukraine. If you believe that your country is reliant on Russia for your economy, for your defense, for your railroads, I think it's very difficult for you to suddenly go to the streets and protest outside the Russian embassy. And at the moment, we only have a small group in Armenia that does this. And ironically, it's ultra-nationalist.
Mm-hmm.
Who believe that Karabakh should be part of Armenia, for example. So, it's a little bit more complex than just what is morally right. I probably didn't answer your question satisfactorily, but
you answered it to the extent it was possible for you to answer it, and I do appreciate your attempt. Uh, Onnik, let me ask you this. This question has been hanging here for a while. Among other things, what ultimately gives the Armenians the greatest hope that the Karabakh issue will eventually be resolved in their favor, particularly the status part. It actually goes as a continuation of our conversation. I understand Armenia is a small country, but it doesn't make its politics any less complicated. Azerbaijan is not a huge country either. And our internal politics is very, very complicated that an outsider might not immediately understand what's going on. Nothing is ever what it seems, right? So let's talk about the internal dynamics. What's going on within the society? Why do people believe? Is that a belief against all, like hope against all hope? Or is there something tangible, something we can define, put our fingers on, that makes people in Armenia and beyond believe that this fight for Karabakh will eventually be successful?
So, again, another complex and difficult question. There have been a number of polls, surveys, when the Armenian population or a sample of them have been asked, how do you view the future of Nagorno-Karabakh? Do you believe it's part of Armenia? Do you believe it can have some kind of status within Azerbaijan? And so on. And the vast majority, I mean, we're talking, high 90s, believe that it should be independent or part of Armenia. But I think that's only natural. For me, the issue is not what they answer. The issue is whether or not they feel so strongly that they will take to the streets and overthrow the government if the Armenian government was ready and able to sign a peace deal. And if we look, and I think ultimately it depends on the Armenian government what the solution is, and we have seen the Nikol Pashinyan administration certainly water down its approach to Nagorno-Karabakh. Pashinyan has spoken about lowering the bar, for one thing, right?
What does it mean in practical terms? I'm sorry, Eldar Aliyev was wondering, what do you think is possible for us to live in peace, and what should be the compromise for both nations? So lowering the bar, when he said it, what do you think he meant?
So I think everyone really believes that what Pashinyan meant, that independence is not on the table. And he even recently said, like, the whole international community is against this as well. Should we be against the international community? And I think that a number of people, even before 2020, were saying that, independence was not going to happen. So the issue is, according to the Armenian government, about whether or not the rights and security of the ethnic Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh can be secured somehow or guaranteed. We've seen this also to be the approach of the United States, the European Union, and also Russia to some extent, although how this is achieved is slightly different. So that's how I view it. That's what I think he means by lowering the bar. What's also very interesting, in this year, you have seen a marked change in Pashinyan's rhetoric. He has spoken about an agenda of peace, although for the opposition, they're very angry about this. What has also happened, very interestingly, is if prior he was always referring to Artsakh, he is now referring to mountainous Karabakh. And again, I think this is a sign that the lowering the bar means that the issue is that of guaranteeing the rights and security of the ethnic Armenian population of Karabakh. And I think that that is the main issue. I can't remember if it was in your interview or someone else's interview. Onnik J Krikorian said the same thing. He believed that Armenians and Azerbaijanis can actually live together in peace, but the central issue that keeps them apart is actually the status of Nagorno-Karabakh, or rather the rights of the ethnic Armenian population within Nagorno-Karabakh. And I think this is a very big topic that has not been addressed as much as it should be. We know from leaked documents from the 27th of September meeting in Washington, D.C. between Hikmet Hajiev and Onnik J Krikorian, the National Security Council Secretary, that a mechanism was discussed for engaging Karabakh Armenians with Baku. And I think this has to start, and only then can we see what will happen. It's going to be a very, very long process. It's going to require a lot of confidence building and trust after decades of enmity. I do believe it's possible. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I muted myself not to interrupt the stream. Yeah, thank you. My audience apparently wants to know a lot of things about the intra-Armenian dynamic, you know, the dynamic inside Armenia and what's on people's minds. And it's unfortunately not very easy for us to get Armenian guests. I don't know why. I don't think we ever disrespected any guests coming here from any country. Armenia or Armenians living abroad are no exception. But I just want to throw it out there. So let me read a couple of questions. One of them is, why does Armenia always push this narrative that only Armenians live in Karabakh? Armenia exiled over 1 million of our people in 92. Of course, our people are not there. So this is the way the question is written. Let me take a start from this question and ask you this. Do you think people in Armenia are seriously considering or taking into account this perspective that, you know, Karabakh eventually should be a place where both communities live side by side, where, you know, the pre-war, pre-ethnic cleansing, if you allow me, populations are restored, and this is not only going to be where one or the other people live, so it's going to be a shared region. Is that view somehow gaining traction in Armenia, do you think?
So, first of all, I'm not based in Armenia, so I can't really comment on this.
Right. Sorry, we were asking you questions that we would like to direct to many other people.
All I can say this is I can give you a few examples, but they're not representative of the Armenian population. I can't remember if it was earlier last year or in the summer of last year, two Armenians from Yerevan came to Tbilisi. We decided to meet up. And one of them, she said, you know, like, I had never understood what had happened to places like Agdam. She had no idea that it had been totally leveled or that anywhere else had been leveled. So I think you also have to understand that no one has engaged people to fully appreciate the picture of what happened on both sides, by the way. We can talk also about the Armenians, ethnic Armenians from Baku, from Sumgait, ethnic Armenians from southern Armenia, Sunik, Zangezur, call it what you will. The issue of ethnic Azerbaijanis returning to Nagorno-Karabakh is a sensitive one, but it does clearly state in the trilateral statement that there will be the return of IDPs and refugees to their homes, but no one has really spelt out what that means. Armenians are worried a little bit that if that happens, then the demographics of Nagorno-Karabakh change. This is all I can say. But then again, no one has really engaged. And if you actually look at some Azerbaijani academics, I probably pronounced his name wrong, like Shujat Ahmadzadeh, who's now studying in the US. You should try to connect with him at some point, I think. Okay. And also Kamal Aliyev in Sweden. They have been trying to look at models which could make this possible while securing both sides within that space, and also guaranteeing that there's no manipulation of demographics and so on and so forth, while this long process, this long transition towards coexistence can happen. I mean, of course, it sounds like a dream considering all the hatred that's around, but I do believe at some point it has to happen and it will happen. The question is when.
You know, I'm listening to you, and even it sort of like gives me a jolt. I'm not going to lie. Hearing Armenians concern that the demographics of Karabakh will change when people who were thrown out of there return somehow. You know, I'm trying to understand, like, where could you make that argument? You know, we ethnically cleansed people, and now if they return, they're allowed to return post-ethnic cleansing. It'll change the dynamic, or it'll change the population proportions. You know, I'm not even asking about 250,000 Azerbaijanis returning to Armenia proper. You know, even discussion about Azerbaijanis returning to Karabakh, which, as you said, the world community recognizes as Azerbaijan, is creating such a, you know, uneasy, you know, tension among Armenians. What is wrong with this picture then? I mean, how can we ever hope to achieve anything if even something as axiomatic as you threw people out, they have to have a right to return, makes people uneasy? I hope, I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional, but I hope my question translates.
I mean, I totally understand. There also has to be the distinction between any return should be the right to return of the individuals. Do they want to go back and live in Stepanakert? Do they want to go and live in Khojaly, for example? The 7 regions are quite clear that there will be incentives and so on and so forth. But I also believe that Armenians and Azerbaijanis have been so separated from each other for so long, this conversation probably isn't appropriate at this time until someone genuinely tries to bring these sides together. And this is why I do believe that Karabakh Armenians and Baku need to start talking, and they should have started talking soon after the 2020 war. So I do understand your point, but it's not like tomorrow ethnic Azerbaijanis can return to Khojaly, right? It's way more complex than that. We're not even sure if ethnic Armenians would want to go back to Baku, for example. In an ideal world, to have these countries again to be more diverse in terms of ethnic mix, I always think is a good thing. But there's so much work that needs to be done in order for that to happen. I have been looking through some of the previous peace proposals, and especially the 97 documents that Levon Petrosyan was in support of, and which Kocharian, Vazgen, and Serge basically rejected. All these things were considered, okay, including having markets that were properly regulated, monitored, secured in order to get Armenian and Azerbaijani populations to start communicating with each other, to start trading with each other, and so on. This has not happened in the post-2020 situation. We've had a few success stories, like, for example, cooperation over the Sarsang Reservoir. I don't know what the name is I don't know if it's Sarsang in Azerbaijani as well. And also some cooperation in terms of the rerouting of the Lachin Road. And also, by the way, this is very interesting, is that even in the 97 proposals, it's actually envisaged that the road is rerouted around Lachin town or Lachin city so that Lachin is also returned to Azerbaijan. This is not something new. I think we have a distinct lack of information about previous peace proposals, what they actually mean, and no one has really explained what they mean. Again, I was looking through the full text of the Madrid Principles, and it speaks of the Lachin corridor, of course, but like the 2020 like the 2020 ceasefire statement, it also talks about unimpeded and immediate access from Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan. But if you speak to most people in Armenia, they'd act as though this is a totally new thing that's come out of nowhere. It isn't. We don't know enough, or most people don't know enough, and there's been no discussion. Civil society has not described what these things mean. The governments have not told people what they mean. And I think that when there's no communication about these things, of course it's going to be very difficult for Armenians to even contemplate the idea of coexistence, sadly. I'm not sure it's so easy for Azerbaijanis to contemplate the idea of coexistence.
Well, if I can repeat the narrative I'm hearing from Azerbaijan, is that Armenians still live in Baku, the Armenians still live in Azerbaijan, and they even point to the old lady that was one of the relatives of people in Karabakh, I believe Araya Karotunyan, who was injured when Ganja was bombed. So, the exception I want to take to what you said is as follows. Of course, I understand it's hard for Armenians, ethnic Armenians, to return to Baku because Baku is the capital of Azerbaijan, and it probably could not be put at the same level as Azerbaijanis returning to Karabakh, because let's look at it from the international law perspective. Karabakh is territory belonging to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijanis returning to Azerbaijan is probably a little less difficult. I would put it on par, Armenians coming to Baku, I would put it on par with Azerbaijanis returning to Armenia, because we're talking about crossing national borders here. But, Azerbaijanis returning to Karabakh, I'm still struggling with that concept. But I don't want to waste too much time on, belaboring this point, but you try to explain it to the best of your ability. Let me move on, if you don't mind.
Oh, let me just, sorry to
Please,
interrupt.
go ahead then. If you would like to, please go ahead.
Let me just say this. I would love to see this happen. I think it's incredibly important that this happens. The question is how can it happen, and is it possible to happen now, and what needs to be done in order to make this possible? People need to understand what are the fears and concerns on both groups as well, because we can talk about also the security and rights of ethnic Armenians within Nagorno-Karabakh, right, as part of Azerbaijan. But so too, we can also talk about there will be issues relating to the rights and security concerns of any ethnic Azerbaijani that goes and lives in a majority ethnic Armenian area as well. This is very complex. Had there been a peace deal, if there's going to be a peace deal, I am sure that there will be elements within that peace deal that will address such issues. But we do have to understand that there are concerns and fears and stereotypes or perceived threats that may or may not exist, that exist on all sides.
All right. This is not an easy question for me to ask. I know you've been involved in peace building, in trying to bring peace to the region for a very long time. Unfortunately, the 2020 war broke out. Unfortunately, this showed that after so many years, both sides are no closer to dealing with the conflict peacefully, and a war is something they will resort to. So this is sort of like a dual question I want to ask. Do you think the wars are over? What, if anything, did the war teach about this conflict? I understand you're not in Armenia, you repeated that, but you're probably closer to knowing the Armenian people's position than I am. So let me ask you this, since many others won't come on our program. What were the lessons, if any, of the 2020 war, and do you think the war may break out again?
I am not 100% sure that any lessons were learned. And I think the fact that a lot of us, or some of us, are now very concerned that an opportunity to sign a peace deal has been lost. I don't believe any lessons were learned. And I've always believed that the longer the conflict is left unresolved without a peace deal being signed, or at least a framework peace agreement was in place, the harder it will be to sign such a peace deal, and the more likelihood there would be of it turning to violence again. In 2011, the International Crisis Group, myself, and many others were getting so despondent that we were warning that war looked like an inevitability. And even on 25th of September 2020, an Azerbaijani acquaintance of mine actually contacted me on Facebook and said, "Onnik, I'd like to interview you about peace building in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict." My response to her was, there is simply no point in me giving an interview to you, because war is inevitable. I had no idea that war would break out 2 days later. I thought maybe in 5 years, but the sense was that no one was genuinely aware of the fact that time was running out. And I think that in Liberidian's interview with you, he said time was not on the Armenian side. And I still believe that's the case now. So some of us believed that if the peace agreement is not signed by the end of last year, which was what the hope was, or at least by the beginning of this year, then there's every chance of a new war by spring 2023, i.e. in a few months. It is quite possible the deployment of the European Union monitoring mission in Armenia may prevent that. But I also think it depends on Baku as well. I think Farhad Mamadov said that actually if Azerbaijan wants to do something across the border, an EU flag is not going to stop it. And then if you look at Georgia and the European Union monitoring mission here, it has been unable to stop what is called creeping annexation by Russian forces in South Ossetia. However, also very interestingly, the first European Union monitoring mission, or capacity as it was, left on December the 19th. And the European Union mission in Armenia will not deploy until 20th of February. So that means, in essence, for 2 months, there has been no European Union monitoring presence on the Armenia-Azerbaijan border, and yet we have had no reports of any major incident. Unfortunately, what has happened instead is that Azerbaijan has turned its attention on Karabakh. I say unfortunately because, it's a very complex issue about Lachin as well, but there's no doubt that it's affected the psyche in Karabakh and amongst activist groups. It has turned its attention now on Karabakh, and many opposition politicians and groups allege that Nikol has wiped his hands of Karabakh, and so Azerbaijan may not need to do anything between Armenia and Azerbaijan itself, and its focus now is on Karabakh and trying to coerce integration into Azerbaijan proper, which is probably the case.
I was trying to look up that quote by Farhad Mammadov, but I failed, unfortunately.
It's on Jam News, jamnews.net.
Net, okay. All right. Yeah, I know the source that you're talking about. Yeah, I'll look it up after the broadcast. Not that I don't believe you, but I wanted to show it to the audience as well.
Even a number of analysts have said this, like Benjamin Pogosyan, who you've also interviewed. He has also pointed out that the European Union monitoring presence, it's unarmed, it's small, even it's going to be like up to 100, and we don't know if that's 100 monitors or 100 in total. So maybe they recruited for 69 actual field staff. What are the other 31? Are they monitors, or are they cooks? Are they drivers? Are they administration staff locally employed? We don't know, right? It's small, it's tiny, they have no weapons. And what is the European Union going to do if there is an incident? So, and he has said that it can reduce the risk of conflict, but it cannot guarantee that it will not happen. And I think that's pretty much accurate.
Whether the European governments and publics have an appetite for an extra, cross-border monitoring mission like that, and putting their own citizens and their own soldiers at a risk of dying, we don't know. Right?
No soldiers. It's civilian monitoring mission.
Even civilians. All right. Actually, let me ask you this question. It comes at an opportune time. Sadikhov is asking, what is your opinion about foreign operations from EU and Russia in Armenia and Azerbaijan? Do they actually help, or only causing continuation of the issue in the region? So the Russia part, I believe you already gave an answer. You're welcome to come back to it if you would like to. But is EU helping? Outside actors, let's take a broader look. Outside actors, you can talk about Iran, you can talk about Israel, you can talk about Turkey, you can talk about the European Union, France, taken separately, whichever way you would like to, frame this conversation. Do you think they're helping? Do you think they're hurting more? Do you think they're giving one side, especially, let's talk about Armenia, do you think France is giving Armenia too much of, empty hopes, and when it comes time to actually deliver on promises, those countries balk? What's happening here, do you think?
I think the French question is appropriate. Benjamin Pogosyan was recently in Sunik region, and he's openly said this. This isn't a secret. He wrote about it or mentioned it in a podcast. And he spoke to people in Sunik region, in Goris, I believe, or one of the villages close to where they can see an Azerbaijani military outpost. And people there genuinely thought that the French military were going to come and guard their borders, and if necessary, fight a war with Azerbaijan. That, of course, is not going to happen in the realms of anyone's imagination. So is there the risk that people have false hopes? Yes. And I think that, unfortunately, too many groups have given Armenians hopes, and therefore they have been used to delay an inevitable conclusion or agreement. The European Union monitoring mission I'm actually okay with, but I have openly expressed my concern that unless there is a genuine underlying peace process involved with it, that too could be used to delay the signing of a long overdue peace deal. However, when we look at the text of the agreement, effectively what the mission statement is, it does look as though the European Union certainly is aware of this, and it does talk about the need to contribute to signing of a peace deal. And I do believe that if something does not result in the signing of a peace deal, then it is not very constructive whatsoever. It's just delaying something, the inevitable, just like we had for 26 years following the 1994 ceasefire agreement. And I don't think that's in anybody's interests.
Our audience may disagree with me, but I feel there was a watershed moment. I feel that after the 2020 war, there was some genuine, desire to find some common language on the Armenian side as well. I felt it for the first time in a very long time. Of course, we're talking about my individual perceptions and feelings. I'm not going to try to pass it as for a scientific fact. But what I felt was there was an opening. There was a tiny window that closed really fast when U.S. President Joe Biden spoke about genocide. I felt that it revived the sentiments on the other side and the intransigence. Again, I might be wrong. If you'd like to comment on that, please go ahead.
If you're talking about in terms of Armenia-Turkey relations, I had never actually linked it to Armenia-Azerbaijan or it having any effect on Armenia, Azerbaijan. I mean, if you listen to many analysts in Armenia, they will argue that the U.S. process on Armenia-Azerbaijan negotiations is basically to settle the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict as quickly as possible, have the Russians leave, and have Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. So I don't see, we have this weird contradiction, right? I don't think there's any sign that the United States is willing to upset the boat. I think that we should look at that separately. Now, of course, Armenia-Turkey and Armenia-Azerbaijan are somehow linked.
How are they linked? I mean, I'm trying to understand the Armenian psyche. Is there an understanding that Azerbaijan was not at all part of the Ottoman Empire, where the claims that genocide happened? Azerbaijan had nothing to do with anything. It was part of the Russian Empire, just like Armenia. I mean,
so the tragedy is as you know, many Armenians call Azerbaijanis Turks.
Right.
So therefore, by virtue of the fact of that name, you're somehow already linked.
Well, I call myself a Turk. I don't impose my view of my identity on others, but I'm an Azerbaijani Turk, and I understand that. But on the other hand, am I complicit in anything that happened in Turkey? I don't think so. I mean, I understand the distinction is hard to make, but don't people have to make that distinction, though?
So I was meaning something different when I said the two are linked. I actually meant in terms of the fact that the Armenia-Turkey border was not open because of the taking of Kelbejar, right? And that it remains shut because of that. And now that the two processes, Armenia-Azerbaijan and Armenia-Turkey, whilst ostensibly separate, are reliant on progress in each other. So Armenia-Turkey normalization will go quicker if there's progress, genuine progress in Armenia, Azerbaijan. That's what I was talking about, the linkage. Personally, I don't think in terms of genocide, the two should be linked whatsoever. I've never believed that. It's more to do with the dynamics between Azerbaijan and Turkey in terms of their relations and supporting each other.
Right. We've been past an hour. Are you tired? Do you have time for one or two more questions?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Let me ask you, switch gears a little bit. Shamil is asking, opinion that Ruben Vardanyan is aiming to replace Pashinyan as prime minister is gaining traction. What do you think about that? Who is Ruben Vardanyan if we look at him through your eyes, or if we look at him through the eyes of the Armenian public, on whose behalf I'm continuously asking you to speak? I apologize for that. Yeah. But who is Ruben Vardanyan?
So first of all, I cannot speak for Armenians, and I cannot speak for the Republic of Armenia or the Republic of Karabakh. Not the Republic of Karabakh. Gosh, that's my slip of the tongue.
Whoops.
Karabakh. Oops. So I we had a little chat, if you remember, a few weeks ago, and we spoke about Vardanyan.
Mm-hmm.
And I said prior to things taking off a little bit, getting heated, I hadn't really been thinking about Vardanyan. I still think that the jury is still out on whether he's Moscow's man or not. He very definitely made his money in Russia. But there was this situation, very interestingly for me, is when I was at an event where there were Armenian and Azerbaijani analysts present, and I joined them for lunch. And at one table where they were eating lunch, the conversation between the Armenians and Azerbaijanis was Ruben Vardanyan. And the discussion was about what are Vardanyan's motives. And there was a genuine belief that Vardanyan wanted to come to power in Armenia. I then go to another table, also full of Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and the same conversation was happening. And I do believe there is a belief that ultimately Ruben Vardanyan did want to establish himself politically in order to come to power in Armenia. But I have not spoken to Vardanyan. I spoke to someone who knows him recently, and he said, yeah, he believes that the same was true. But again, he's not sure that it can be categorically stated that Moscow sent him for that purpose.
Is there sort of an apprehension that we know what kind of people make money in Moscow? I truly do apologize. We know that Vardanyan has been referred to in the press as Putin's moneymaker or Putin's purse man or something of similar, nature. Is that even a question whether he's Russia's man or not? I mean, I'm trying to.
Well, I mean, we have the same discussion here in Tbilisi, right, about Bidzina Ivanishvili. And actually, what's really ironic is that at those tables that I mentioned to you, they were actually directly comparing Vardanyan with Bidzina Ivanishvili. But this is also a very complex question in Georgia as well. Who is Bidzina Ivanishvili? He also made his money in Russia, right? And he's accused of being pro-Russian and all this. I mean, Vardanyan is pro-Russian. It's clear. He's also very strongly linked to the Russian Armenian diaspora as well. I don't know enough about Vardanyan to say. We can look at a number of factors. Sanctions, attempts at sanctions against him, prevention of or protection of money made in Russia, and so on and so forth. But I cannot categorically say it. I think when I tweet, I say the jury's still out on whether he's Moscow's man. I mean, there's also this other contradiction, right? If he is Moscow's man in Karabakh, are the criticisms of the Russian peacekeeping force in Lachin helping him in that situation or not? Mm-hmm. Right? And many people would say it's not helping him. So, how do you, I think Tom Duval argues this point, for example.
I could counter that maybe with what I think, but I don't want to air conspiracy theories. I don't think this would be the right place to do that. But if you and I have a private conversation, I might actually offer a couple of theories that are, going through my mind. But let's leave it for the next time we talk. If you don't mind, let me ask you this. We alluded to Arman Grigoryan a couple of times. In the last interview in Russian that he gave me, he said that Armenia's national doctrine vis-a-vis Karabakh means that Karabakh is, Armenia. And I asked him whether it makes any sort of peace impossible. A priori, if you consider the territory of I don't need to explain what it means. So let's look at the Armenian national doctrine, the way you see it, the way you understand it. Does that preclude at all any possibility of peace? Is it dead on arrival, basically, any hope for peace between our two countries?
I think there are realities that will have to sink in eventually. One of the things that I have said since the November 2020 ceasefire statement was signed was that Karabakh is not viable in its present form without good relations with Baku. It is not even all of the former Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous oblast. It doesn't have full capacity to generate its own power. It does not have full capacity to irrigate all its fields. It is linked to Armenia only through the Latvian corridor, which only exists, if we interpret the 2020 ceasefire statement, for as long as the Russian peacekeepers remain. And actually, let's say Karabakh was independent, the same situation would be true. So whether people like it or not, Karabakh Armenians and Baku have got to speak, and Karabakh will always, forever, be dependent on its relations with Baku for water, for trade, for electricity, for gas. So I think it's inevitable that people have got to face up to these facts. You could argue that the European Union, the United States, even Russia have understood this. Pashinyan may have understood this as well. So for him now, it's only a matter of the rights and security of the ethnic Armenian population. When it will, I mean, it's not going to change overnight, right? You can't expect, a cornerstone of the past 30 years of Armenian national identity just to be wiped out of existence overnight. But it does mean that the rhetoric has got to be calmed down. And I don't think the Latvian corridor situation is helping here. You have a new generation of kids in Karabakh who now will just remember, the winter when goods were in limited supply in Karabakh, and when gas and electricity shortages occurred. National ideologies change depending on the situation, the circumstances, the reality, and I think people have got to work on that. It requires also a change in official political discourse. That's what I think.
All right. I'll ask you the last question, so I will stop torturing you with all these questions. And I do appreciate you coming and talking about all this. Since we're trying to look beyond the horizon and see peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and I'm being genuine when I say that. I react to people on Twitter because I'm an emotional person and I'm a human being, and seeing my identity attacked day in and day out only because I'm Azerbaijani and I'm an object of hate. I don't understand that. I truly don't look at any Armenian and immediately ascribe the worst emotions I can find in my heart to a single person only because they have an Armenian last name, right? I mean, I would not consider myself a civilized human being if I did. But let me ask you this narrative about our religion, our cultural, inferiority. We see that all the time. I read that in two languages, in Russian and English. I don't know to what extent you read Russian social media. You might not. There's probably a lot of it in Russian, but there's enough of it on Twitter in my in my feed. I've heard that I'm a nomad. I should go back to Altai, to Siberia, which I'm very proud of whatever roots people ascribe to me. If it's Altai, it's Altai. My country is younger than Coca-Cola. I can repeat all this stuff, and I can repeat stuff from the Azerbaijani side too. What I'm trying to say is, how do people view themselves as moral and attack somebody's identity like that? You are a Westerner. I hope it's okay that I define you as such, and I've lived most of my life in the West as well. If we say that here in America about any group of people, any religious group, any ethnic group, you're immediately labeled as a racist, and rightfully so. How is that possible that I'm reading that on Twitter about Azerbaijanis for years and nothing is happening? I mean, is there a problem in my comprehension of this, Onnik? I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, what is wrong with people?
I think Twitter encourages this type of behavior. I don't know how many times you're reporting tweets. I do know people who do report such tweets, and it takes a while. It can take months even before these accounts are suspended or closed down temporarily. Of course, the situation could get incredibly worse. Now we have new ownership at Twitter. It isn't one-sided, of course, but I do believe that we somehow assume that what we see on social media is reflective of the masses, and it most definitely isn't. As I have told you in private conversation before, a lot of the names doing most of this, they are not new names. They didn't suddenly emerge since 2020. They were doing this even before 2020, when supposedly Armenia was victorious. So they have always just been against peace and against coexistence. I think the religious aspect is very unfortunate, but I think it's also because Armenians and Azerbaijanis don't know each other well enough or at all. And I can give you a quick story. A friend of mine was BBC correspondent for the South Caucasus and based in Tbilisi. I was living in Yerevan at the time. He had visited Baku. And he had to come to Armenia. I can't remember what the story was. So he quickly went to Tbilisi and immediately went from Tbilisi to Yerevan. And we met up and we went to a bar in Yerevan. And I purposely wanted to introduce him to the bar staff as someone who had just come from Baku, because I thought they might be interested in hearing what life is about, like in Azerbaijan, because they've had no other opportunity to do so. And the barmaid looked at him and said, "Oh, you must be really happy to be in Yerevan now after Baku." And he looked at her and said, "Why?" And she said, "Because they're Muslims there. They don't drink alcohol. They have no bars." And, you know, this is the level of a lack of understanding between two groups, right? Because they have not met. They do not communicate. They don't even see what real life in Baku or Yerevan looks like. And actually, you'd be surprised. I mean, one of the first things I noticed when I first made contact with Azerbaijanis in 2008 and connecting on Facebook was actually most of the pages of, let's say, a 20-year-old Azerbaijani look pretty similar to the pages of a 20-year-old Armenian. The same musical taste, the same lifestyle, the same concerns, fears, interests, etc., etc. And most people don't see that. And I think that this is why people-to-people contact is so important. But I don't mean people-to-people contact as it is at the moment, where you just have members of the so-called expert community meeting up regularly. I'm talking about real people. Even many people don't understand when they travel from Yerevan to Tbilisi that they drive through the largest concentration of ethnic Azerbaijanis in Georgia. The road that goes from Yerevan to Tbilisi goes through Kreml-Kartli, goes through Marneuli, and they're not even aware that they're driving through 280,000 ethnic Azerbaijanis. You know, and I think that more, and this is one of the reasons why I valued Georgi Vanyan's work so much, because
May he rest in peace. Yeah.
because a lot of the work that he did was about connecting normal people, and not just from the capitals, also from the regions. I went to a few of his Tekeli events. Hosted in an ethnic Azerbaijani village close to the borders with Armenia and Azerbaijan, you know, and the villagers were looking after everyone without any distinction. We need those types of contacts again, and I think that's what we're missing at the moment. And I hope, touch wood, that if a peace deal is signed, a lot of emphasis and is put on real people-to-people contact and not just the elites from the capitals of the two countries. Also,
Knocking on wood. Right.
also culture. I think, you know, musicians, you know, in Tbilisi, we do have Azerbaijani, before the pandemic anyway, Armenian, Azerbaijani and Georgian musicians, from jazz musicians to classical musicians to even heavy metal musicians, sharing the same stage, sometimes performing together on collaborations. And I think that we need to have more such projects in the future as well.
I truly hope it does happen, if you allow me a comment. Even elites don't know each other, because I remember this situation in Strasbourg a couple of months ago. I was talking to the I don't want to name them, but Armenians from Armenia who are very well positioned, and I believe there were 5 or 6 people there, and 2 Azerbaijani women came up to me and wanted to talk to me. Armenians were shocked when they saw the Azerbaijanis, and I realized, and these are people of my generation, maybe slightly younger, I realized they know nothing. They've never met Azerbaijanis before. They see Azerbaijanis in a different way. Seeing a blonde Azerbaijani woman wearing a a shorter skirt is shocking to both women and men from Armenia. They apparently had a different picture, a different image in their head. which again makes me agree with you that people know very little about each other. I kept you for an hour and 25 minutes. Can we make it an hour and a half?
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
I kept you waiting how long for this interview? So I think it's
Right.
prerogative to do this now. So,
Okay. All right. There is this question I want to ask you, and I want your opinion on it, your personal opinion. Why do we not see any recognition on the Armenian side that the Lachin Road was misused, that illegal activities did take place, that this situation did build up to what it is now? We can talk about Lachin, we can talk about impasse, as you called it, or blockade, as many other people call it as well. Okay, but why do people not want to talk about what actually, we can argue ad nauseum whether these are environmentalists, although I interviewed some environmentalists on my program here too, or whether they're sent by the government, which I also tend to believe that no demonstration in Azerbaijan can occur without the government's will to at least tolerate it, if not instigate it openly. Let's not joke. But, okay, but why doesn't anybody want to acknowledge that there was a cascade of events? Baku numerous times expressed its displeasure with what's going on and what's being transported through that road, and what element of control or even supervision does Azerbaijan exert over this road? Like, why isn't that acknowledged?
First of all, I don't know if it's been proven. Last I read that the Russians were reviewing the evidence that Azerbaijan had submitted. I certainly have not seen anything that proves it. All I've got is an allegation that landmines were being brought into Karabakh. So I cannot categorically say if that's true or if it's false, right?
Would you tend to believe it, like your doorstep opinion, if I came at you in the middle of the night and say, do you think it happened? And what would you feel like saying?
My personal opinion is that Lachin is far more than even about the mines, the mining mines, not the landmine mines. This is complicating to these two terms. I think it has a lot to do, as I've told you. I think this has a lot to do with no progress made on what has become known as the Zangezur corridor. Everyone talks about, for example, Article 6 or Item 6 in the 9-point ceasefire agreement has not been implemented, i.e. There is no free movement on Lachin, but no one wants to talk about Point 9, which is that there should be routes connected between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. And I think that basically the main reasoning for Lachin is that Baku has given up waiting, and so the logic is well, if you want to put controls on Zangezur corridor, then we're going to have controls on Lachin. I cannot comment on the allegations because I've seen no evidence. I know Caliber have said that they have it, but I haven't seen anything that makes me believe it. But I'm also not saying it didn't happen. Obviously, the extracts from the mines were being exported out of Karabakh. So a side issue is Azerbaijan also exerting or trying to exert or re-exert control over Nagorno-Karabakh, i.e. this is in the territory of Azerbaijan, and therefore these mineral resources belong to the Republic of Azerbaijan and may not be extracted and exported without the permission of the Republic of Azerbaijan. So I think that Lachin is a very complex issue, and there's more going on than just about whether landmines were being transmitted. I think December the 3rd, right, was when the road was blocked for 3 hours. But from what I understood, an agreement had been reached whereby they would, the Russians would introduce scanning devices, and it was said in one report that Azerbaijan authorities would have access to the data from those from that scanning equipment. Mm-hmm. Then that was the last we heard of it. And then the next thing we know, December 12th, then that's when the full control, and I'm using the term control because, I put this to Adnan in your interview, and he said, it's not a blockade, but we are controlling the road. And I think that is the correct term. It is an effective blockade, but it's only an effective partial blockade because we also need assistance is also passing through there. Of course, it's not as much and not enough. Vardanyan himself has said that people are not going to starve. It seems as though he's trying to hold out until the spring, because then the natural agricultural and crop production facilities of Karabakh kick in, so that they can be even more self-sustainable during this time. I'm not so sure it's about landmines, to be quite honest with you, and I think a number of people are very skeptical about this. Not to say that it's not happening, but I do believe that a lot has got to do with the lack of progress on Zangezur corridor, and also what seems to be the breakdown of negotiations at the beginning of December, after they looked as though they may actually yield results by the end of the year or the beginning of this year.
You know, actually, I would like to also know whether it's about landmines or not, because I requested an interview with ANAMA, with the Azerbaijani State Anti-Landmine Agency, and I truly, truly hope that they will accept this invitation and come and speak with us and our audience. Thank you so much, Onnik. It was worth waiting. I'll be honest with you. It was worth waiting, and as with all good interviews, I feel like we just started, although we've talked for an hour and a half. But I truly hope you will find time and desire to speak with us again in the future, because I would like to hear your voice, literally and figuratively, on our channel again.
Thank you for the invitation. I hope the next time maybe there's again hope on the horizon, because it's long overdue.
I truly hope so. And by the way, watch Gerard Leberidian tomorrow on our channel as well. He graciously accepted our repeated requests.
But it's going to be in what language? English?
Well, he speaks English, yes. I don't speak Armenian. He doesn't speak Azerbaijani or Russian. So
Okay.
English will be the only language that in which we can conduct it. So I hope to see you and many others tomorrow on our channel. Thank you so much, Onnik. It was great meeting you.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers. Good night.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is our interview. It was truly, truly worth waiting. Onnik and I have talked a few times prior to this interview, and I was hoping to see him on my channel. There were some issues that precluded us from talking sooner, I should say. So we finally did, and I'm truly happy that we did. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do share. Please do like, comment, and share our content, because we depend on our viewers for this. Let me say a couple of words in the end, not to editorialize or put words in my guest's mouth. He spoke for himself, and you'll be able to hear it from him. What I wanted to say, I'm addressing the Azerbaijani public as well, and the Azerbaijani public officials too. It is easy to invite Armenians and talk to them and ask them all kinds of difficult questions and put them in a hot seat and air our frustrations and maybe our grievances and direct it to them. It would also be fair for us to have access to Azerbaijani public, to the Azerbaijani government officials as well, to ask them what they think the problem is, what they think they did wrong, what they think they should have done differently, right? It would only be fair. I'm not asking for anything else. I'm only asking for fairness. You know, if we can ask difficult questions to Armenians, being an Azerbaijani channel, wouldn't that be absolutely, natural for us to have the same right to ask our own people, our own government? So the Azerbaijani public would ask our own government questions that they might not want to hear. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Generations that don't know each other. My guest today talked about it, and you can go back and listen to it again if you would like. He said that there are 20-year-olds who look the same, they care about the same things, but they don't know each other at all. Not only 20-year-olds. My concern is, I'm 50, I'm 49, I'm turning 50 this year. And my concern is, I'm about the youngest of Azerbaijanis who grew up seeing Armenians in our city, in Baku, or in Ganja, in any other city where they lived, in Sumgait, who sat at the same desk in school, who were friends whose families were friends with each other, who celebrated birthdays and weddings. The other day I saw a wedding video from 1988. I couldn't tell who was Azerbaijani on that video, VHS, on YouTube, and who was Armenian. I couldn't tell. Maybe all of them were Armenian because it said Armenian wedding in Baku. In 1988, I saw children running around. It brings me a lot of sadness to talk about this, because, those children grew up. They were slightly younger than I am now. Um, and that's it. They didn't know what was going to happen in, a year or two. We all didn't know what was going to happen in a year or two. I know that returning to those times is impossible. These last 30 years and the things that we have seen made it impossible to returning to the Soviet times, diffusion, as I call it, diffusion of populations. I understand that, but it doesn't mean we cannot be civil and civilized to each other because we're neighbors. We will always be neighbors. We should probably make more attempts to get to know each other, reacquainted with each other. It's easy to see an enemy where you want to see an enemy. It's not easy to see a friend or maybe somebody more neutral than a friend. But I think it's necessary to at least think about it. Think about the time when that will be possible. With that hope, and with the hope of seeing you all tomorrow when we interview Dr. Gerard Liberidian on our show. It'll be 4 p.m. In Washington, and it will be 1 a.m. in Yerevan, Baku, and Tbilisi. 1 in the morning. It'll be late. But I hope you watch it, and I hope you watch it in recording. And thank you very much for your time. I'm Ismail Jalilov. Goodbye.